I'm JJ Lee, and I'm the mentor of nonfiction at the Writers Studio at Simon Fraser University. And this is Unstuck at Word Vancouver. And I would like to acknowledge that this festival takes place on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. As I mentioned, this panel is getting stuck and luckily also unstuck. A conversation about banging your head against the metaphorical wall, hard-won writing victories, and all the strange and beautiful things we learn along the way. I want to make a special thanks to Connect UBC, the UBC Library, and UBC Robson Square for their sponsorship, which made this space available to us. This session is sponsored by SFU, the Writers Studio. Yeah, give a hand, give a hand.
Woohoo!
And of course, we'd like to thank generous donors and sponsors. So we have the Canada Arts Council, the Canada Heritage Fund, BC Gaming, Creative BC, the City of Vancouver, the Downtown, the DVVIA, I'm not going to try to do the acronym for you, the Hamber Foundation, the Joseph Wass Foundation, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, CWIL, CWILL, Pace and Associates, the Federation of BC Writers, the League of Canadian Poets, yay, Sarah, and the Writers Union of Canada. And a full list of partners can be found at wordvancouver.ca. That's wordvancouver.ca. While you're there, don't forget to support the festival online by becoming a member and also participating in the silent auction. That's wordvancouver.ca. Whew. That was a good one. I felt good about that. All right. Candy Tanaka is a multiracial trans writer, artist, and librarian. Their first YA book, Baby Drag Queen, was published with Orca Books in April 2023. Give her a big hand, Candy Tanaka! I've actually never learned how to pronounce that part of your name.
I gave it to you.
I know.
I sent it in an email.
I did it.
Emelia.
Okay, so I'm going to give it.
Symington.
Sim. Okay, I know it now. Emelia Symington-Fedy is a theater creator, broadcaster, and author. Her memoir, Skid Dogs, just came out 1 week ago. Emelia! Congratulations.
Thank you.
Emi Sasagawa is a recipient of the Edward R. Murrow Award, the Rafe Mayer Award for Excellence in Journalism, the Canadian Online Publishing Award. Very nice, good work. Her debut novel, Atomweight, came out May this year. Emmy, everyone. Sareh Farmand is the co-founder of the Word Shop Collective, a boutique writing and editing firm. Her first book of poems, Pistachios in My Pocket, was published last year. Sareh, everyone. Okay, you guys don't sound rather stuck at all. I didn't have a book last year. I'll tell you stuck. But I thought before we even begin the conversation, if we could go, Candy, if you would start, why don't you tell us about your book and just the scope of the project, and then maybe later we'll do another round where we highlight, we'll do a reading of the trouble part. But we'll save that. Just give us an overview of the book.
Okay, so basically Baby Drag Queen is about Ichiro, who's a transgender teen in his last year of high school. And he sort of works part-time, I'm just reading from the back actually, as a dishwasher to help support his single mother. But he dreams of buying a camper van and sort of getting away, with his mother to sort of a place that's a little bit freer because his mother's experiencing some sort of harassment at work. So when a local club announces a drag prize, he wants to enter. So he's a baby drag queen just getting started. So Ichiro is transgender, basically AFAB, so a female at birth. And that's kind of what the scope is. It's a YA novel, and it's with Orca Publishers, who some of you probably know is in Victoria, which is really great. It's so nice to have local support. And that's kind of like a little bit of an overview of the novel. Is that
Yeah, lovely. Thank you,
Okay,
Candy.
you're
Candy
welcome.
Tanaka, everyone.
thanks.
Emmy, why don't you hit us with Atomweight?
Sure. Candy was so eloquent. So I'll also read from the back of the book. Some Atomweight is my debut novel, and it basically is a story of Aki, who by all accounts is a good girl, good student, and good daughter. And she's always done what her loving but demanding multiracial family expects. When she goes off to university in the UK and she's far from Vancouver home, she's adjusting to life in London, filled with studies, friends, and a tentative first relationship with a closeted woman. Eventually, Aki comes out and ends up getting herself into sort of a violent incident, which triggers an unexpected response in her. She then discovers that brutal bar fighting relieves her stress, and she begins to lead a dual existence, obedient and accommodating by day, and brawling by night. This is a novel that started in JJ's writer studio workshop, originally as a short story, and then it developed into a book with the support of Tidewater Press.
So my book is called Pistachios in My Pocket, and it's with At Bay Press. It came out last year, and it tells the story of my family's escape from Iran and coming to Canada as one of the first wave of Iranian immigrants that came after the Islamic Republic took over. It follows a narrative arc, as I said. The first part of the book is about our life in Iran and pre-revolution. I take us back in time to my grandmother's Iran when it was by all accounts, a freer, well, definitely freer country. and then the middle part is about our life in limbo, living in Europe as immigrants, not knowing where we'd end up. And then the third part is about our experiences in Canada. And yes, that's it. I should say I did start it in TWS as well. Yes.
Well, my name is Emelia Symington-Fedy, and more props for JJ. Started my book in TWS, inspired by a thought from JJ. Skid Dogs is about growing up in rural, lower class BC, 1990s rape culture, before we knew what rape culture was, and my gang of girls and how we grew up on the railroad tracks. I've got a launch tonight at the Culture. Everyone's welcome.
All right, I guess we're gonna go like we'll do this sweep back on you, Candy, if you don't mind, and I hope I'm in the shot now. And sorry for looming over you.
No, this is good. I was just giving you space.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Just a
So
little bit more.
why don't we talk about your stuck moment? And I know that we talked a bit by email about pulling out a passage that represents that stuck moment. Can you talk about your stuck moment and give us a taste of the passage that reflected the stuck moment rather than the unstuck moment? Can we talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think my stuck moment sometimes revolves around how much to reveal, personally. So a lot of that is in this book, even though it's a book of sort of kind of like fiction. But there is a passage, I guess, that kind of relates to, how when I was growing up. So I guess I'll read a little bit from that and talk a little bit about it. But basically, I'll just read like a few pages. Chiro's mom finally leaves for work, which means he can play some video games. He plays FIFA for a couple of hours and then takes a nap. When he wakes up, it surprises him to see that it's 5 p.m. already. Bored, he gets up and snoops in his mother's room. Ichiro knows he shouldn't be in there, but his mother's room has always been a mystery to him, especially the large and very full closet. He never knows what he'll find in there. Last month, he checked out some old dresses in the back that he can't remember ever seeing. She probably wore them way back when she met Dad. Ichiro moves the bulky winter coats and old hat boxes out of the way. He has to be super careful to put everything back in just the right way. I think I'll just maybe kind of stop there because I know we've got lots of writers, but just that very brief passage just, kind of reflects, back to my home life experience where my mom had this closet that just always seemed like a mystery to me. Maybe it's a metaphor for something now, I'm thinking back on it. But I just feel that, when I know when I was writing this book, because it is about a transgender multiracial teen, I went back and thought about what it would be like if I could sort of almost relive my life again, in those days, with the current times, because it would be a lot different, I think, for myself. So this is kind of like what Ichiro is going through. So it was a moment, for me, just being stuck in writing. I had an opportunity to actually write a YA book, which is not what I had initially thought I was going to write. I went into TWS and I got accepted into the nonfiction portion, not with JJ, but with Charlie Demers. And I ended up sort of going more towards fiction because for me, it felt a lot freer. So that was kind of like when I started writing fiction. I'm actually working on a full-length fiction novel for adults right now. But when I started writing fiction, I just found that some of those points that I would get stuck in where I wasn't too sure, like, is this like nonfiction enough? Is it real? Is it sticking to the fact? I felt a little bit stuck there. So when I moved to fiction, for me, it felt a little freer. Yeah.
So like just the nature of nonfiction was the first level stuckness thing you're saying, right? And
Yeah.
then the pivot to fiction liberated you. But the interesting part is when we draw a lot of fiction from our nonfiction, let's put it that way. Did you feel like there was this shaky ground and you kept on sort of, were you blocked on that level? You're saying you're being blocked on that level too. It's like, oh, I'm not fictioning it up enough. Is that?
Yeah, I kind of felt like, there is that point where I'm like, is this, I was pulling from my real life in a way, or my imagined real life if I was back then, but then also parts of my real life, and thinking, am I putting enough sort of fictional elements in there, and am I pushing the boundaries enough too? And I guess I did find out in a way I was, because I did get a lot of negative feedback about this, because basically it is about a transgender person. There's a lot of negative feedback right now, and it's about somebody that's doing drag. So as you probably know, there's a lot of stuff in the news right now. So, but yeah, that's kind of where I got stuck. Not saying that nonfiction is not something that I want to write, but I think for this particular kind of world, it helped free me a little bit, just because as a more marginalized person, I felt there's a little bit more freedom, at least for me, in that. But it did start out in, kind of have its base in nonfiction a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is a great segue to you, Emmy, because you were I don't know what you were doing with that book, to be honest, because you were in the nonfiction workshop. So can you talk a bit about your journey exploring nonfiction and deciding novel writing was the way to go?
Yeah, for sure. So when I joined the writer studio, I'd only ever done journalistic writing. So even the thought of doing creative nonfiction caused me a great deal of stress and anxiety. And I had gone in thinking that I was going to write about my relationship with my family being mixed. Halfway through the program, we had a check-in with JJ, and we were just talking about different things that have happened to me in my life, and an idea or something that to me didn't sound super interesting piqued JJ's interest. And he instantly said, you need to be writing about that. How can we sort of get you started? And I felt really uncomfortable because it dealt with coming out. It dealt with folks that I'm no longer, I would say, close to, but also who have never come out. And so I was really concerned for their safety in terms of writing them into the story. And it started off as a nonfiction essay. And the folks in my cohort were just so supportive and just wanted to hear more and more. And I think their enthusiasm sort of fueled me to keep on writing a little bit and then a little bit. And eventually, I decided that while there are elements of the story that draw from things that have happened in my life, I didn't want it to be a memoir. And when I made the choice to transition into fiction, at first it was really scary because, again, I'd never written fiction. But ultimately, I think it allowed the characters to breathe and exist in a way that is markedly different from the people in my life, and for the book to become its own thing. So
can you read a little bit from the book and let us hear, maybe, I don't know if it's salient or if they cross over in that nonfiction fiction kind of thing, or even just about characterization, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. Or voicing, because that's another thing. Sorry, can we talk about, because it was a big journey for you to stop being a journalist,
Yeah.
in terms of voicing, right? Was that a stuck moment too, a bit?
Yeah, it was to approach things from a pseudo objective perspective, and on the other hand, to lean into the subjectivity and like how the character is experiencing in that moment. I'll read from it.
Okay, thank you.
This is not about like a moment of being stuck, right?
Well, no, just read it. We'll see what it is.
Okay. I'll just read from the prologue then, and I'll read from the first moment that Aki sort of got herself into trouble. The front door swung open and slammed against a chair, admitting a frigid wind and a young South Asian man who took a seat at the bar and ordered a pint. I pulled my hair back from my face so I could see him better. He was a definition of average, short, only a couple of inches taller than me, with straight black hair perfectly parted to one side, wearing the caramel boots, acid-wash jeans, and navy blue bomber jacket typical of first-generation Asians on the rise. He and I were the same hue of brown, but where the hairs on my hands were thin and light, his were thick and black. There was something about his features that reminded me of Aisha, the nose, the eyebrows. He looked like Assad, or was it just me, thinking all South Asian men looked the same? I inhaled deeply, stretching my arms above my head, then turned to the bar and took the last sip of my drink. A little teaser. A little teaser.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, leave it. Thank you, Evie. Thank you. Thanks, Evie. All right, Sarah.
Well, it's interesting hearing you both speak. It makes me think of one of the main things that kept me writing this book, and it was what Betsy Worland said in TWS, and she used to say that writing and solving writing problems happens on the page. So anytime I felt stuck, I knew that I needed to sit down and write it out. The other thing that helped me was also something I learned in TWS, which was 80% of writing is actually revision. 20% of it is writing. And so if you can, for that 20%, stay in your creative brain, in the right side of your head, and just get it all out, all the things that you want to say, you just get it out on the page, and you don't worry about grammar and capitalization is grammar, but you don't worry about any of that, and you don't even worry about voice and tone, whether or not your description is ridiculous or not. Like, you just say what you want to say, then you can go back and you can figure all of this out, which is what you both are saying that you did. And I've heard Joseph Kakwianokanasam say that as well in his novel, where it starts out as something, and then it grows into something else, right? Like, so for me, what I always found where I got stuck, similar to you, Candy, about how much of myself am I sharing, but also for me it was, I say some very political things in my book. And even though I grew up in Canada, I still had the fear of the IRGC and what they can do, the Islamic Republic. And I remember I was writing one of my poems, and the first time I had to type in Khomeini's name, and I just, like, literally my fingers just jumped off the keyboard, and I went, like, I can't do this. Like, what am I doing? I'm going to put, and I mean, I'm this girl with this little book in Vancouver. So I don't know, but there's that fear of like, who's going to read this and what's going to happen. And then I had a moment, and I actually had to turn to sort of like my mentors in art. And like, I thought about Kurt Cobain, and I thought about things and Joni Mitchell, and I thought about, like, so not poets per se, well, poets, but in a different field. And just what I learned from their artwork, which was always like, art has to be real, it has to be sincere, it has to be vulnerable, because it's relational, and you can't have a real relationship if you're being false. So if I was going to write this book, I had to be brave. And so I'll read you that poem. Ironically, in the revision process, his name is out of this poem.
I thought it was
See?
going to be a page full of just.
So-
I thought it was going to be a page of Khomeini.
Yeah. He's in here, but not in this one. It's titled Discordant. Dutiful players on a chessboard, clearly defined, black and white. You both meet every expectation beautifully. Humble yet successful, hardworking, helpful. Save your money, pay in cash, enjoy life, but don't be lavish. Judgment leaves no room for error. Prizes awarded later. Abruptly, an illegitimate player enters, commissioned by England and the US, swings his bony, wrinkly, liver-spotted, thieving hand, scatters pieces, chaos. So the first part is about my parents. I should have mentioned that before I read, sorry. So yeah, it's about, I kind of pictured my parents, you know, kind of having this certain life and then everything changing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very beautiful. Thank you.
Thank
Sarah.
you.
Emelia, your stuck passage, stuck moment, stuck thoughts. Was it sticky?
I'm a playwright, and so this was my first attempt at narrative. So I was most stuck in, I don't know how to write a book. Like that was where I was stuck. I was just stuck at the very beginning. And I wanted to kind of speak to the inspirational part of being stuck, which Wade Compton, again, I don't know if this is a writer's studio like commercial or something. He talked about, and I don't know if it's his stuff, he might have grabbed it from someone else, something called the rupture, and how when you are stopped, you're just stopped and you just cannot. And that means you're about to start writing your really good book. And so in the moments where I would be stuck and frozen, I would remind myself that maybe this was a rupture. Maybe this was absolutely necessary. Maybe I needed to stop everything, rethink everything, throw everything, return to everything, take a month off. Maybe this rupture was going to bring forth what was going to be the excellence I was hoping for, which I have to say was true 100% of the time. So the stuckness for me became a very sacred place that I would make myself sit in and not push through and say, I've got nothing to say right now. I can't, and I don't know why. And I'm just going to stay here until Goddess comes and tells me what to say. And so, yeah, that the rupture, I just love that. I would love you to hold on to that word if you can. So I'll read mine. As the other way I would get unstuck when I was writing this memoir was I would write scenes like I'm used to, like a play. I would dialogue. I would do what I'm good at. So I'm going to just do that right now. And I've never read this part out loud, and I'm sorry if it's inappropriate. Okay, I'm going to read 2.5 pages. It's not just, no. Okay. On the first day of grade 8, an hour before the bell, we met on the tracks to prepare. I wore a Bart Simpson t-shirt, hammer pants, and a red beanie cap with a working propeller. Bugsy was more subdued, sticking to bum equipment tank top. I noticed a few risks taken in her accessorizing. Her streaked bangs were sprayed higher than I'd ever seen before, and she smelled of a new scent, Body Shop Dewberry. I'm not going to be late on the first day, Crystal says, standing in the same combo of 501 button flies, plaid short-sleeved shirt, and gleaming white sneakers that she wore every day. She'll be here, Max said. We're not leaving the chicklet behind. While my friends looked tucked in and crisp, waiting for Ames to arrive, I hoped that my bright colors and spinning propeller would evoke an untouchable confidence on this first day of high school. Yoodle doodle hoodle, came a high call from behind us, followed by a laugh. Turning around, we saw Ames running full tilt our way. Yoodle doodle hoodle, she sang out again, her thin legs galloping haphazardly, her high pony bouncing in time. You guys, she started. I thought you might have left already. I was freaking out, but I needed a slush, so we stopped at the Sev, and then I got nachos, and Mom was like, no way is that going in the car, because the last time, so I had to finish them at the cheese machine. She pulled out a pack of unopened Trident, passed it to Bugsy to hold. I ate so fast the cheese burned the roof of my mouth, but luckily I still had some slush left. Ames opened her mouth, tilted back to show us the red patch. So I chugged the slush. Now I'm fine. She went back to digging in her purse. Found it. Ames raised a tube of grape-flavored lip chap. My lips are dry like cornflakes. She circled the tube around her lips 6 times fast. We've got less than 40 minutes before we have to grow up. You ready? Bugsy shoved 3 pieces of gum into her mouth. On the tracks, we can still be us, right? Yeah, we'll always be ourselves here. Duh. Since the girls had caught me spying on them at the beginning of summer, we'd gathered at the same spot almost every day to walk and talk along the rails for miles. While the girls told me which kids to steer clear of, which parents to behave around, I'd stopped thinking about my few friends I'd left behind in Ashton Creek. The promise I'd made to write weekly letters to my next door neighbor floated away. The deer runs, the evening river swims, seemed to quietly withdraw. And as my comfort in my new skin grew, I turned my back fully on the land Mom had worked so hard to make our home. My lack of filter seemed novel to these girls. My bossy tendencies helped us make decisions faster. Also, they hadn't found out I'd grown up in a trailer and enough time had passed that I could bet there wouldn't be any more questions. So while nothing tangible happened on these long days of walking and talking together, for me, everything was happening. Bugsy stopped walking. Did you hear? Ryan fingerbanged Twyla with her tampon in. Max froze. Bugsy enjoyed her shock, then continued. They were making out. She didn't want him to know that she was on her rag. We gathered around her. This was what horror films were made of. He got down her pants. She tried to pretend everything was normal, but because of the tampon, he couldn't get his finger very far up inside. Bugsy started walking again. I'm never getting finger banged, I said, rushing to keep up. Me either, said Ames, following behind while tightening the pony on her head. Then he felt it, Bugsy said. I turned from the weed. I was scuffing with my toe and faced Bugsy. What? He pulled the tampon out of her body? Yeah, she said. He pulled it out of her vagina.
Thank you, all readers. Thank you. That's a rupture. I agree. For Emmy and Candy, Sareh and Emelia had an opportunity to talk about some of the ways that they were able to get unstuck. Can you tell me about the journey for you to just overcome? I know that you've presented the problem well. Can you talk more about the unstuck part of it?
Yeah. Well, actually, the novel itself has 3 narrative arcs that entwine. And so for me, one of the hardest things while I was writing, especially editing, was figuring out what the climax was. The book is filled with fights and with moments of tension. And so at one point, it just felt like any one given thing could have potentially been the climax. And what it took was rearranging the entire timeline of the novel. So literally printing sections of it, getting 2 large pieces of paper and creating a timeline, and then shifting to see what would create the best rising tension. And what I landed on was originally what I thought was the climax existed somewhere in the middle of the book, which from the perspective of storytelling makes absolutely no sense. And so it required me to basically go and move pieces around so that the last three acts of violence occur in this little tiny section here. Actually, to be honest, in this little tiny section here. That is the climax. And you can see that between climax and resolution, it's very little. It's basically just as long. So for me, the biggest roadblock or moment of being stuck was figuring out the climax and the pacing of the book, and wrapping up the three narrative arcs to then bring you into one final moment of tension. So the way that I did it is there's three final acts of violence. One of them, which signifies the breakdown of the character's relationship with her family, especially her brother. Then the next one is the breakdown of her relationship with the woman she loves. And then finally is the breakdown of the fighting itself, of seeing fighting as a way to sort of cope with everything that's happening with her, and realizing how much it's also taken from her and how it's become a source of punishment. So all of these scenes and chapters used to exist sprinkled throughout the book. And while there are many other moments of fighting, these, through sort of a puzzle exercise, were able to build the kind of tension that I wanted before you lift that tension and allow basically the character to grow. Yeah.
Thank you, Remy. Candy, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, the challenge was actually just writing a YA book. So it's really structured so differently from other fiction, and especially this particular line from Orca, which is the soundings line. It is basically a format, like a specific format that you have to follow. So it's a specific word count for each chapter. It has to be written for a grade level that basically for individuals that are reading below grade level. So I found that a little bit of a challenge because at the time I was finishing up my librarian degree, my master's at U of A. And so I was writing academic writing and then also trying to bounce back to like YA writing. And I had to rewrite basically a few times because a lot of the sentences, I would just be writing them like I normally write. And then I would run them through this Hemingway editor, which is a really good app that they had recommended. And they basically tell you, what the grade level is. And I had to adjust it many times. And so it was almost like I was writing it like 2 or 3 times, which is a little bit painful, but it's a really interesting structure. So that's kind of like, how the way I sort of got around it was just what I remember talking to a mentor before, and he was just like, you know what, just don't be afraid to just write whatever you're going to write. Like, however you're going to, like, maybe he could feel this hesitation in me because there was a lot of, basically transgender and just about my own personal experience that's sort of in this novel in a sort of a roundabout way. So I did that at the beginning and it just felt so freeing. So I felt like that became Unstuck. And then the editing, like Sareh mentioned, which is totally right. I mean, all that revision and editing comes later on.
So
and
form comes later kind of thing?
In a way, for this kind of format, I felt that, that was the way I had to write it. So I think, and then what also helped me become Unstuck too was just a really fortuitous, like, year where other little things were getting published because I hadn't had anything published for a long time. I've been in the writer's studio since like 2013, I think was when I graduated, and I just kept, just like Sareh mentioned, just keep writing and writing. And I think everyone basically on the panels mentioned, don't give up, and part of my fear too was just I didn't really submit that often. I'm still like kind of stuck on that. Part of that is due to time. Like we all have a limited amount of time. It does take a long time to put submissions together, and then you get rejections and you just feel like, like it's almost like applying for a job. It's like it's like another part-time job, right? So once I got over that sort of thing where I was like, you know what, hey, I've submitted just a few things and they got they actually got published. I'm like, what would happen if I submit more? So so now I'm on this thing where it helped me get unstuck, just getting one little thing published. It was like basically an essay in residence, which is one of the again another commercial for TWS. Is a TWS. A lot of collaborators in there. It's authored by Andrew and Laura that are both with the TWS program. So got a little essay published in there. And then a few other things came with like a couple really short flash fiction pieces in this anthology here. So it was like a really good year for me. And I think I felt a little bit more unstuck. So I could, hopefully, we'll see what happens. But yeah.
Well, thank you, Candy. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
no
that journey. I think I'm gonna look at. Sorry, not to be rude. I just looked at my watch. Pardon me. But it's 1:36, and I thought we would open the floor for some questions, or we have war stories to share amongst ourselves, and we could ignore you entirely. But I thought if there were some questions, or people want to share some of their stuck moments, and I think we have a crack team of advisors to unstuck you right now. And so, if there are any questions about the role, or like sorry, I do want to segue a bit, or create a new thread of thought here. It seems to me that fear is actually one of the strongest forces that creates stuckness, in the writer that we have here today, and so if we want to address that issue, we can talk about fear of writing, whatever that could possibly mean, or fear of being read, even, right? And fear of being judged. And so if you have any questions about that role and how to overcome it, I think that was actually a big part of the workshop, like our time together in the workshop at TWS, I imagine, too, with addressing issues of fear or risk that we took. So yes, please. Oh.
Hi. There's something I want to ask, but now I feel like you really want me to ask. How do you handle the fear?
No, please. You're welcome. You want to go with the, how do you handle the fear? Do you want to go with that?
I don't know how I handle the fear. I was going to ask how much do you use the tool of brainstorming? If you're stuck on something, how useful it is for you to just talk about it.
How useful is brainstorming is the question. Anyone want to pick up on brainstorming here? Maybe brainstorming?
Sure. I think it's really helpful. I want to say it's like, I did find a lot of now I was lucky because a lot of this I wrote in the TWS program. So I had poets and also friends from outside the poetry group that we talked about the book quite a bit. So I think it was maybe like a percentage of it, of the issues that I faced, I did talk out. But I do also believe, I want to say it's almost 50-50. I think a lot of it too is just like sitting down, like Betsy Worland said, and just getting it on the page. And that's what really helped me overcome it for me personally.
And sorry, just for a clarification on your question about brainstorming. Sometimes brainstorming implies kicking it around with other people. Do you mean that kind of brainstorming, or more hitting it?
Social,
Yeah,
I
it's
wouldn't
important.
be surprised if somebody would say this is like my thing, and others would say like I'm not as interested, but that's what I'm
Yeah, for me, 50-50. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to toss it around with other people.
Yeah,
Then. What about you, Emelia? Did that help?
I'm going to say I work collaboratively. That's my jam. I brainstorm everything with everyone, and then it leads to a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and you're left alone, still stuck with more ideas. And there's been times where I've even gone down the route of, this is a brilliant idea. Thank you. You helped me crack it. And I've gotten it down, and I've realized, but it's not mine anymore. That was their idea. God damn. So, yes, great. It's good to share. It's important to engage with your community and get it out of you, but you will be with you, figuring it out and making the decision in the end.
Yeah, I think what I'll add to that is, I think Stephen King said that like you have the door closed and then the door open. So the first time you're writing your draft, the door is closed. It's you writing the draft and simmering in your ideas and thoughts and putting them down on the page. And when you're finally ready to show it to, people that you trust, that's when the door open process begins. Now, I think that's a little bit prescriptive, and I think that you can sort of define when you want that door to open. But certainly, I think you need to be at a place where you're comfortable enough with your story and that you have a sense of where it's going, that the people that are around you and talking to you aren't going to dictate the path that you take, if that makes any sense. So, for example, the person sitting at the front here, Julie, she was in my TWS cohort, and over the past 5 years, we've stayed in touch. We've gone on writing retreats together. She's read multiple versions of elements of my manuscript. And so that's an example of like a brainstorming that has helped me. But before showing it to her, I had to reach a stage where I felt, okay, like I'm confident in this chunk of whatever that I've put together that I'm comfortable enough standing behind, and I know the questions that I want to ask this person. Yeah.
Would you say that before you open the door, you get a feeling of what your story is about?
Yeah. Yeah. Even if all the pieces aren't in the right order, because they weren't until the last year.
Thank you, Emmy. Candy, any thoughts about that whole brainstorming part?
Yeah, I'm actually a very introverted writer. I did go through the TWS program, and there were like lots of workshopping sessions, and you take everybody's feedback for what it is. But for the writing that I've been doing recently in these three things, I actually wrote almost all of it just on my own. I didn't let anyone see it until it got to the editing stage. Maybe I'm sort of like a weirdo in that aspect, that I'm like,
savant.
I keep it very close to me, and do multiple revisions, and I find the editors are just really great, but I kind of really want to protect my vision, and in how it was, just because I feel that everybody has their own unique perspective, and I just don't want it to be influenced by other plot twists that other people think it might go in a different direction. So maybe anyways, that's sort of how I've been dealing with it. I mean, and I also pull from I really like to pull from lots of different areas in my life of my interests. So like I also am really have an artist background, so I like to pull in from that area as well, like sort of into my writing. And so that's how I deal with it. Everybody does stuff differently, but I found that I am actually really introverted when I'm writing, and I've been advised to basically workshop things and let other people see it, but I'm like, no, I don't really want to. So that's just how I work. Yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in with a response? Is that okay with you in the group here? There is this moment where courage of your convictions needs to kick in. I think for Emmy and Emelia, because you were in my work, there was a moment where I basically wanted to just kick you out of the workshop, essentially, and say, can you just write it and not come back with stop submitting what you're writing and just come to the workshop and don't submit. And I think that happened. I think we've had conversations kind of like that, where you need to stop sharing it and you need to just believe that you can write it. And I think that's an important step to take at some point. Thank you for your question, and thank you for letting me provide a little bit of an answer as well. Yes, please.
I was going to ask a complimentary question, actually. I was curious about when you're doing, I'm much more like you, the introverted writer, when you're stuck and you're in your room by yourself and you need to try something new to unstick yourself. What do you do? Do you have any tricks? Like, what kind of brainstorming then do you do? Do you make lists? Do you outline? Do you what actual tasks do you do? The craft.
I'll repeat the question just in case the mic didn't pick up. I know it's omnidirectional, but we'll give it a shot. So the question was, when you're on your own in your room and you're stuck, what techniques do you engage in to get unstuck? Hopefully that captures it.
Okay. Yeah, I really want to share this little piece, and I think it. I learned it from Betsy Warland and Yoninia Curtin, and it was to have your companion pieces with you when you're starting a book. And so it can be books or art, like music or artwork or whatever. So I had like a group of, I mentioned Kurt Cobain and Joni Mitchell because I had like their music with me. And then I had a poetry book with me, Margaret Atwood's In the Burning House, that one, yeah, Morning After the Burning House. And those were my companions. So anytime I felt that way, I would actually either listen to the music or I would open the book, and it would just, and I think part of it was like, if someone can finish something, I can finish something too. Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, I take kind of I would say, stop everything and go for a walk. Just stop trying. That's what I would try. I think my brain is too activated. I will not find my way through. Stop. I treat writing like as a sacred practice, as I think it is. And it may sound ridiculous, but clean your office, go for a walk, light a candle, like change it up energetically. Ask, sit down for 5 minutes and say, I'm a vessel, I'm a vessel, I'm a vessel. Like, do all the things other than try to keep writing. Maybe is an option too.
Yeah, I think both of what you said has resonated with me. I try to set like small, achievable goals. So if all I think I'm capable of doing today is writing 3 sentences, anything beyond that is a huge success. And I think it helps to feel like you've accomplished something. I go for like cycles. I like riding my bike, and I usually have what I think are moments of like literary epiphany. It's probably not, but it feels that way when you're cycling, where I have to like stop and I'll write it down, and then I'll try to incorporate that when I get back home. And then stimuli, so like scents, sounds, taste, can really put you in a writing mood. I also, because this book started off as nonfiction, there actually are a lot of like songs and sounds and, like smells that put me in a space where I was 19 years old, living in London and going to university. And so even like bringing those back into my life would put me in a mood for like inhabiting that space. And then I think the last thing that I'll say is, if you really can't get anything down, read. Like it can be so inspiring to read someone's work who you admire. And even if the next page or so that you write are basically a pastiche of whatever that one person has written, it will get your juices flowing again. You can always go back and revisit it and make it your own.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Any thoughts?
I think like as Emmy and Emelia mentioned too, is like physical exercise. Definitely, like walking is one of my favorite things to do. I live in the West End, so I love to go on walks, there, and check out the scenery and stuff. But I also find too that, like I mentioned, looking at different areas. So like I might pull a book of art off my bookshelf and just kind of look at that for a little bit. Also just sitting with being stuck. I think Emelia mentioned that too. You just kind of sit there and you just kind of, it really feels uncomfortable because you just feel like you're like a failure or something because you just can't move past it. But it really does help to just sit there and just like realize that, hey, I am so stuck. Do I even know what I'm doing here? Like, what's going on? And then I just like sit there for a bit, and a lot of times you just have to, I think what also we learned in the writer's studio is sometimes you just have to put your novel away for like a little bit of time. So like you just shove it in a drawer, do not look at it for a couple months even, depending on where you're at, unless you're at obviously the stage where you need to submit something, and then pull it out again and look at it. And then sometimes I'm like, wow, that is actually not too bad that I wrote that. I'm like, okay. And then there's a lot of stuff that I see that I'm like, no, that's awful. Like cross that out. So those kinds of things really help. And then I'm also a fan of like blocking out time. So I'll just like block out, I can write for 2 hours and then that's it. And then I'll go to my K-drama on Netflix. I'm just like, because, when things are so different, it really helps in your brain to just focus on something that's so different. Because I'm like, K-dramas just relieve me of all my stress, especially when I was doing academic writing too. And I do like to look at academic texts or like texts that are a little bit more dense sometimes too, because there's lots of really good nuggets that you can just like, it stimulates your brain and then helps you kind of like bring something that's a little bit lighter to your page. So those are kind of things that I look at.
Thank you, Candy.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, please.
My question's about like revisiting a piece that had been stuck with me for quite a while. And I've noticed sometimes like when you get back to it, if it's been quite a while, you can start writing again if you're lucky, but then you've almost got like a different voice. And I'm just wondering how you deal with that challenge.
So do you think the challenge is when you come back to look at an older work, it suddenly doesn't feel like you can enter that writing voice because you've changed somehow,
or
right?
you do start writing again, and it's kind of like
They don't match, right?
Okay.
Right.
So Atomweight was written over the course of 5 years, so I definitely experienced that. And through it, I started also doing a lot of anti-racism work in my like day job. So the latter half of the book became imbued with like critical race theory and like language that probably 19-year-old Aki wouldn't have known when the book started. And so I think it's a matter of figuring out, is there one of the two voices that suit that piece better? And if there is, then making that choice and transitioning. It's much better to go back to the work and make it cohesive and make it one complete piece, as opposed to, you know, I don't want to go back. Then might as well not like go back to writing it in the first place. But there's also, I think the thing with like creative writing is that if you really want it, you can make a change in voice feel intentional. You can make it, you can have it be like a subplot, right? And so part of what I did in the book is that I realized that I wanted that language to stay, but I needed the character to get there. And so I needed to create opportunities for the character to learn that language. And so I think that if you want there to be that transition and that shift, there are ways to incorporate it. But if to you it feels very clear that the voice you have now, that you've come back to it after 6 months, that that's really how the story should be told, go back to the beginning and, you know, write it out with that voice.
It's 10 minutes to, yes, we'll
Hang
do
on,
a couple.
can I just say one quick
Oh yeah,
thing?
my big
I'm
pardon.
going to say something that might like be intense for you. Like every time we come back to the page, we are different, right? Like I'm different from my therapy session. I've changed. I'm back. I'm different. And so, write your book. Write your book, because we're always going to be different. You're always going to be changing. In 6 months, you'll be different. In 12 months, you'll be different. And so just get it down and get it out. And then in 5 years, you'll be so embarrassed that you wrote it because it'll be so different. But just write it. Get like, you know what I mean? Because we're constantly changing.
Kevin Chong, long listed for the Giller, taught at TWS. And when he was at TWS, he advised students to write forward. You will always be changing. Just write the next part. Don't go back. Keep going forward. Always go forward. And so I'm not sure if you're talking about, because you might be in revision stage, so you might that struggle's a bit different. But if you're still progressing to the end, go forward, not backwards. Be the new you. Be the new writer that you are, but progress forward. And then you'll those cascading of voices can help you find the voice overall in the end.
Yeah. And you'll be doing lots of revisions, so you can bring that in, because I'm in that stage right now where it's just like, and I just keep revising it, because you'll be doing that anyways, even through your submission process, your acceptance process, just lots of revisions. So just keep bringing new rating into that, you know. Yeah.
2 last questions. We're going to go. Yes, I got you, Julie. I'm going to do the back row. I'll do the first row. So yes, your question, please.
I'm wondering if this is the place to ask what the writer's studio is. I'm at the point where like I need, structure would be good. You need some framework so you
Well, what I would highly, if you go to 32 books after this session and buy their book and chat with the authors, you can find all you could possibly want about TWS right then and there. They would love to share their experiences with you and how the program works. And I think that's the best way. 32 books. You'll be able to find copies of Emelia's, Sarah's, Emmy, and Candy's work right there. So is that okay? Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. And I'll be around to help answer any questions for you as well right after the session.
JJ's still a mentor. So
Yeah, I'm still a mentor. Yeah. They haven't fired me yet. Julie.
Just, I think a quick question, who knows, but back to the theater piece and all of you going through the process with personal works, kind of navigating that. Just curious to know, once it's out there in the world and you're talking about it and reading from it and everything, if that went away or if it's how that is for you now.
I think no.
You're still afraid?
Like the exposure there specifically.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I haven't really read the book front to back since it was published. And I go into little moments of panic when I realize that anybody could buy it and read it. So I would say the fear is still there.
Sorry. I'm a year ahead of you, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say just recently I think it was a friend of mine who's a teacher wrote me and he said, oh, we do these projects in the beginning of the year where the students have to talk about themselves. And he said, I asked my student if I can share this. So it was a screenshot and they had my book. And he was like, and I was like, who's this person? He's like, you don't know them. Like they're just not even know. So I was like, someone I don't know bought my book and read it. Oh, and my husband told me that there was like a Goodreads that someone we don't know had commented. And then there was a Goodreads someone I don't know commented negatively. And I was like, this is so cool because I don't care. And it does, and yeah, so yeah, I think I finally, like when it happens more than once, you're just like, oh. And I did read someone saying that once your art, it's like, it's got its own life, like it's no longer mine. But it took a year for me to just be like, okay, it's fine. Yeah.
The positive, I would say, a terror, absolute terror, 90% of the time. The positive is when someone gets it, there's nothing more incredible to be gotten.
Yes.
To be met and to have someone understand your experience in your brain and relate to it. And you feel like you've touched a little bit of making the world a tiny bit better and more connected.
I feel too that, I did go onto Goodreads to look to see what and I did get several 1-star ratings, which I appreciate as well. I actually find them a little bit humorous.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the comments too, but some really good constructive feedback on the 3-star out of 5. I don't think a lot of people realized it was a YA book. So I was like, okay. But I just find the constructive feedback on Goodreads is actually really interesting. And I do appreciate it because a lot of it was like stuff that I thought about while I was writing. I was like, yeah, it is like, because it's such a short format, there's not really a proper plot arc, or it is hard to do a proper plot arc. So that, that was a little bit of a challenge, and people are saying, oh, I wish it was longer, and I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of complimentary in a sort of, almost like, good way. I hope. But so those kinds of things, I think also too, I remember when I was first started out at TWS, I was so scared to read. And it was, I think all of us probably were at some point. And, but the more times you do it, the easier it gets. And then like Sarah mentioned, when you do get, even just, I thought if one person enjoys this book, like, yay, that's a good thing. So like, when you do get people coming up to you and saying, oh, I really enjoyed this book, or my daughter enjoyed it, or whatever. And I was like, thank you so much. And then I was like, good, I don't really care about all the other stuff. And then, when you do go back and read your stuff, like Emelia was saying, like later on, or at least for me, sometimes I look at it and go, oh my God, that writing is so awful. Like, ugh, right. And then, but then you just keep on continuing to write better. You just have to let it go, basically, is what you have to do. You just write it. And, like Sarah was saying, you let it go out in the world, and it is kind of like what it is. You just have to deal with it. Because you always, when you're a writer, you always want to do better. But how many times can you rewrite your same book? Like I'm in that revision process, and I'm like, I must have written this book like 50 times already. I just wish someone would publish it. So.
Thank you, Candy. Everybody, Candy, Emily, Sarah, Emelia, give them a big hand, please.
And JJ, big hand for JJ.
Thank you to the Word Vancouver volunteers. Thank you to the sponsors. Please remember to visit 32 Books to buy a copy of our lovely authors' books. Also, if you want to support Word Vancouver, don't forget you can become a member. You can also donate, and you can also participate in the silent auction at wordvancouver.ca. Thank you very much for being such a great audience. Have a great afternoon.